The queen expected the children to bow. Instead, one trembling girl crossed the flooded shelter and clung to the human soldier everyone had accused of corrupting them. He did not hug her back. He only opened his hands where the guards could see and said, "Careful. Floors slick by the west vent." That was when Queen Aloan began to wonder what kind of kingdom made children run to a stranger for safety. Welcome to Gravity and Stardust. I hope you enjoy this video and have a day filled with happiness. Now, let's begin the story. Queen Aloan Veilora stepped off the royal skimmer expecting order. Not comfort, not gratitude. Order. The kind that survived cracked glass, ash-gray rain, and frightened children because the crown required it to survive. Royal Minor Evacuation Shelter 17 stood beneath the broken ribs of the Western Ecological Dome, its emergency lamps flickering through runoff mist. The shelter had been built for 100 miners. It now held nearly 3 times that number after the pressure seal failed and the dome folded inward like a wounded lung. Temporary conduits buzzed along the walls. Cold water shivered across the metal floor in thin, silver lines. The air smelled of coolant, wet cloth, and fear pressed down until it looked like discipline. Her guards entered first, pearl armor forming a clean line no one else in the shelter looked clean enough to cross. Counselor Varesh followed at her shoulder, black relief office coat sealed tight, slate tucked beneath one arm. He stepped around the puddles without looking at them. "Your Majesty," he said, voice low and polished. The report was accurate. The human has encouraged unsanctioned attachment among royal miners. Aloan looked past him. The children were not one group. That was the first thing the report had flattened. Noble children in silver-edged evacuation cloaks stood near the center heat lamps. Lower district children in dull thermal wraps kept closer to the supply wall. A few sat on the floor because exhaustion had outshrank posture. A few held cups without drinking. All of them had pastel purple skin dulled by dome dust, long narrow ears, and eyes that checked every adult before deciding what their own bodies were allowed to do. At the far side of the shelter, Sergeant Matthew Carter crouched beside the west vent with a cracked heater panel braced against his knee. Human. Male. White skin weathered red from cold exposure, short brown hair flattened by rain. 36 Earth years old. Earth Relief Corps attached to Military Rescue Command. His olive undersuit was patched at one shoulder. His armor plates were stacked beside him instead of worn, the chest unit dark except for a blinking diagnostic light. He looked less like an invader than a man who had spent the night losing an argument with a machine and apologizing to it anyway. Then one child moved. Not all of them. Not even most. A small girl, 7 or 8, clutching a wooden doll under one arm, slipped past a caretaker and crossed the slick floor in bare feet. She pressed herself against Carter's side. A boy followed halfway, stopped, and sat near his boot without touching him. 2 younger children edged closer to the vent. Another stayed behind a blanket, watching with only one eye visible. Carter froze with one hand still on the panel. He did not wrap an arm around the girl. He did not smile. He set the tool down slowly and opened both palms where every guard could see them. "Careful," he said, rough and ordinary. Floors slick by the west vent. The girl held tighter anyway. Varesh leaned closer to Aloan. Dependency behavior. Manufactured safety response. Aloan did not answer. She watched Carter shift his boot half an inch so the boy beside it would not slide. She watched a noble child take one step toward him, then stop when a caretaker inhaled. She watched the human look away, giving the child room to retreat without shame. None of that had been in the report. Reports preferred clean nouns. Influence. Attachment. Disorder. They did not mention orange tape handles on child-sized cups, blankets cut small enough not to trip little feet, or mud dried across Carter's knees from kneeling at their height. Carter finally lifted his eyes to hers. Tired. Steady. Without challenge. "Your Majesty," he said, "someone should mark the west vent before a kid goes down." The accusation in Aloan's mind did not vanish. Queens did not trade suspicion for one soft scene. But it bent just enough for a colder question to slip through. What had happened in her own shelter that made even one child run to a stranger first? 3 days earlier, Matthew Carter entered Shelter 17 through the service hatch because the main door had jammed halfway open and every attempt to force it made the hinges scream. The sound hit the children harder than the cold. 30 yards inside, beneath dead heat lamps and dangling conduit, small bodies folded behind benches, supply crates, and each other. The pressure seal failure had shoved power into emergency routing, and the shelter grid kept coughing between light and shadow like it could not decide whether to stay alive. Matt paused in the hatch with one boot in a puddle and one hand on the frame. A caretaker in a pearl gray wrap hurried toward him, palms raised. Don't approach them. Human mass frightens young Valerans. Matt looked over her shoulder. Pastel purple faces. Long ears pulled flat. Silver eyes tracking his height. His armor, the rescue axe clipped to his pack, the helmet under one arm. He glanced at the 8-foot ceiling, then down at his own mud-caked boots. Yeah, he said. I can work with that. He unclipped the axe and set it outside the hatch. Then he removed his helmet, slow enough that no child mistook it for a strike, and placed it on the floor beside the door. His radio spat static near his collar. He turned the volume down until it became a private problem. The west vent rattled, trying and failing to push warm air across the deck. Matt crossed only halfway into the shelter, stopped 20 feet from the nearest child, and lowered himself to the floor with his back against a support beam. The metal was cold enough to bite through his undersuit. He pretended not to notice. From his ration pouch, he pulled a sealed meal pack and placed it 6 feet away. Chicken soup, he said. Tastes like cardboard lost a court case, but it's warm. No one moved. Good. Moving first would have made it his room. He unrolled his tools beside one knee and opened the heater panel instead. Boring work. Safe work. Work with edges. Kids came closer to adults who had something boring to do. That had been true in Kansas after the Greensburg tornado, when a little boy stopped crying only after Matt asked him to hold a flashlight on a broken water valve. True in St. Louis after the flood, when 3 sisters crawled out from under a bleacher because he spent 20 minutes sorting donated socks by size. Don't make kids perform courage. Give their hands a job and their fear a place to sit. A boy in a dull lower district wrap crept forward first. He stopped twice, checking the caretakers, then snatched the meal pack like it might explode. Matt kept his eyes on the wiring. Top's hot, he said. Bottom's less rude. The boy froze, then turned the pack over and carried it back to the others. No thank you. No speech. Better that way. Trust that had to announce itself usually wasn't ready. The next hour moved in inches. Matt placed water cups on the floor, half full, tape folded around the rims for small hands. He marked broken glass with orange strips. He cut oversized thermal blankets into smaller squares because the little ones kept tripping over the corners. He never asked a child why they were crying if they turned their face away. He never called them brave. Brave sounded too much like a grade adults gave when they wanted fear to be quiet. Lena appeared near dusk, standing just outside the vent's weak circle of warmth. She had dust on her cheeks and a wooden doll clamped under one arm, its carved face worn smooth by years of being held. Matt nodded toward it without reaching. Rough day for her too? Lena's eyes narrowed. She isn't for play. Matt tightened a loose contact until the heater coughed once. Okay. He kept his voice level. Then I won't ask her to. Lena looked down at the doll, then at the 6 feet of floor between them. She did not smile. She did not come closer. But she stayed. Varesh restored the room by sorting it. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 2 fingers lifted, 2 caretakers moved, and the children began separating before the order finished crossing the shelter. Noble cloaks toward the center lamps. Lower district wraps near the supply wall. Children with crests beside children with crests. Children without them pulled back into the colder edges. Queen Aloan watched a small boy with a silver mark stitched to his collar step away from an older girl in a plain gray wrap. He looked back once. The girl kept her hand open for him, then closed it when a caretaker glanced down. Matt saw it from beside the west vent. The heater panel rested against his boot, wires exposed. Repair tape stuck to the back of his wrist. He picked up a screwdriver and turned it slowly between his fingers, giving his hands a job that did not involve reaching across royal custom. Varesh looked almost pleased. As you can see, Your Majesty, structure remains effective when outside influence is interrupted. The children stood straighter at the word structure. Not calmer. Straighter. Aloan moved along the line, her silver boots clicking through shallow water on the deck. Are you injured? She asked the first child. No, Your Majesty. The boy's sleeve had dried coolant on it. Are you cold? She asked the next. No, Your Majesty. The girl's fingers were tucked under her arms, nails pressed into purple skin. "Are you thirsty?" The answer came faster this time. "No, Your Majesty." Matt did not look up, but the screwdriver stopped turning. Near the supply table sat a half-circle of small metal cups on the floor, each filled only halfway, each rim wrapped with a crude orange tape loop. Not pretty, not regulation, perfect for hands that shook. Above them, the official dispenser gleamed at adult chest height, untouched except for one wet footprint where a child had tried to climb and been pulled down. Aloan crouched and lifted one of the floor cups. "Who placed these?" Varesh's mouth tightened. "The human." Another example of unauthorized behavioral accommodation. Matt tightened a contact screw. "Kids with shaking hands spill full cups. You catalog their weakness." "I noticed gravity." The answer landed so plainly that no one knew where to put the offense. Aloan turned the cup in her hand. The tape handle had been folded 3 times so the edge would not scratch skin. She held it out to a noble girl whose eyes had not left the water since the queen picked it up. The child looked to Varesh first. That was the part that entered Aloan like cold. Not thirst. "Permission. Drink," Aloan said. The girl took the cup with both hands and swallowed once, too quickly. A drop ran down her chin. She wiped it away before it could become evidence of need. "Were you thirsty?" Aloan asked. The girl's mouth trembled around the trained answer. Captain Soren, standing near the shelter console, watched without speaking. Varesh shifted his slate against his ribs. "The child has experienced stress disorientation." The girl whispered, "I wasn't supposed to be." No one moved. The shelter seemed to shrink around the sentence. Aloan set another cup on the floor, not on the table, and pushed it gently toward the lower district side with 2 fingers. A little boy stared at it, then at the older girl he had been separated from. "Can my sister drink too?" he asked. His voice barely reached the lamps. Varesh turned. "Registry distribution will be handled in order." Matt fitted the heater panel back into place, slow enough that the scrape of metal gave the boy somewhere else to listen. Aloan held out the second cup herself. "Your sister can drink." The older girl stepped forward like the floor might object. She took the cup and did not thank the queen right away because her eyes had filled and she was using every bit of strength not to spill. Warm air coughed once from the repaired vent, crossing the line Varesh had made without asking which children had crests. A few shoulders lowered. Not all. Some stayed rigid. Some kept watching the caretakers. Lena remained near the edge of the light, wooden doll pressed under one elbow, eyes moving from Matt to the queen as if trying to learn which adult meant what they said. Varesh looked at the cups on the floor as though they were evidence of a small rebellion. Aloan looked at them as evidence of something else entirely. Children in her care had not lacked water. They had lacked permission to need it. The question about water had barely settled when the dome answered with a groan. It rolled through the carbon ribs overhead, low and tired, shaking loose a veil of gray insulation from a cracked panel. The children reacted in pieces. One noble boy clutched his cup with both hands. The older lower district girl stepped closer to her brother without touching him. A toddler under the lamps tucked her face into a blanket and waited for an adult to decide whether fear was allowed. Lena's wooden doll slipped from under her elbow. It struck the wet deck, bounced once, and slid through the torn weather flap before anyone could catch it. Outside, the runoff trench carried ash rain and coolant residue along the shelter wall in slow, oily threads. The doll dropped into the gray current and caught against a filter grate, one carved arm sticking out above the sludge. Lena made a sound too small to be called a cry. Then both hands flew to her mouth, trapping the rest of it. A caretaker stepped forward. "Leave it, child. The trench is marked." Varesh did not look away from Queen Aloan. Non-essential sentimental object. Replacement comfort inventory is available. Lena stared through the flap, eyes wide and dry with effort. Matt set the heater panel down. He did not move toward her. He looked at the yellow warning strip beside the trench, then at Captain Soren near the console. Runoff rating? Soren checked the cracked display. Low dermal hazard. High ingestion hazard. External contact limit is 10 minutes without scrub. Depth near the grate is 8 inches. Matt nodded once, like she had given him weather, not permission. He reached for the safety line coiled on the supply rack. Varesh stepped into his path. "Sergeant Carter, that object has no medical or operational value." Matt clipped the line to his belt and pulled on cracked utility gloves from his tool roll. Then nobody important will miss it for a minute. Varesh's eyes hardened. You are performing care for the children. Matt tightened one glove strap with his teeth. No, sir. I'm recovering personal property from low-grade coolant runoff. The answer was technical enough to be irritating and plain enough to be true. He stepped outside before the argument grew teeth. Cold rain struck his face. The trench sucked at his boots, but the safety line held. He moved slowly, one hand on the wall rail, the other reaching between two broken braces until his fingers closed around the doll's wet cloth wrap. He lifted it free and held it away from his body, careful not to drip runoff back toward the shelter threshold. Lena did not breathe until he crossed inside. Matt did not hand it to her. He carried the doll to the scrub station, clipped it under the rinse frame, and ran the deck and spray in short measured bursts. A contamination strip on the cloth flashed yellow, then faded toward white. He waited until it cleared fully. Only then did he wrap the doll in a clean thermal square and crouch 3 feet from Lena. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she could choose. He placed the bundle on the floor. She needed a bath, he said. Lena lowered her hands from her mouth 1 finger at a time. It was my sister's, she whispered. No one asked where the sister was. No one asked when. Some questions only made adults feel useful. Eloan looked at Varesh, whose report had called the children stable for 72 hours. Then at the wet line on Matt's boots, the safety clip still attached to his belt, and the doll resting clean between them. The object had no operational value. That was what made the act impossible to dismiss. By the second night, warmth had become a schedule instead of a promise. Captain Soren found the fault after prying open the lower console with a knife from her boot. Blue diagnostic lines crawled across the cracked display, stuttering each time the dome shifted above them. Pressure seal failure rerouted main shelter power, she said. Emergency grid is rationing heat by zone. South corner drops first in 40 minutes. Queen Eloan looked toward the south corner. That was where the smallest children had gathered without being told, not because it was safe, but because it had been warmest the day before. Tavin sat there with a tin of loose screws Matt had given him to sort by size. Lena stayed near the edge of the lamp glow with the cleaned wooden doll tucked under one knee, touching it every few minutes as if grief could be checked for contamination too. A few noble children kept their silver-edged cloaks wrapped tight and apart. 2 lower district siblings shared one thermal square and pretended not to. Varesh studied the diagnostic screen and turned numbers into hierarchy. Then transfer noble registry miners to Shelter 9 before the cold cycle begins. Soren did not turn from the console. Shelter 9 is at capacity. Adults are sleeping in 2-hour shifts. Registry priority applies. Matt lay half under the south vent with his tool roll open beside his hip. At Varesh's words, his wrench stopped for 1 beat. Then he reached deeper into the heater housing and pulled out a warped thermal cell, its casing blistered from overload. Moving kids through runoff at night for a heater problem is how you get a medical problem, he said. Varesh looked down at him. Your assessment is not requested. Didn't dress it up as one. Matt sat up and set the dead cell on the floor. South vent takes a Mark IV. Supply racks got 2 Mark IIs and a cracked 3. None of those fit unless we want sparks and paperwork. Soren checked the inventory tag. Correct. Matt looked at the children, then at the chest unit stacked beside his armor plates. The environmental cell inside still held charge. Not much. Enough. He unlatched the casing. Eloan stepped closer. That powers your suit layer. Mostly keeps me from freezing when I make bad choices. You entered the runoff this morning. Yep. And you've been running on minutes of sleep since the breach. Matt pulled the rectangular power cell free. The indicator on his undersuit dimmed from green to amber. Nobody's perfect. Varesh gave a thin smile. A theatrical sacrifice. Matt slid the cell into the heater socket and pressed until the lock clicked. A compatible battery. The vent coughed hard enough to blow dust across his sleeve, then pushed a narrow ribbon of warm air over the deck. Soren watched the readout stabilize. At current draw, it holds until noon. Noon's better than midnight. Matt gathered 3 loose screws near his knee and tipped them into Tavin's tin. Count these for me, buddy. Make sure I didn't donate anything important to the floor. Tavin blinked at the tin, then began counting under his breath. One child scooted closer to the vent, but kept both hands in her lap. Another pulled his blanket over his head and left one eye showing. Lena stood, crossed the few feet to Matt, and placed the wooden doll on his knee without a word. Matt looked at the doll, then at Lena. He did not touch her. He only angled his leg so the doll would not slide off. "She can supervise," he said. Lena stayed beside him, close enough that her sleeve brushed his boot, not close enough to be another accusation. Aloan saw the difference. Varesh saw it too, and disliked it more than if the child had thrown her arms around him. Warm air moved across the children in uneven bands, reaching some first, others later, but reaching. Matt leaned back against the wall, arms folded tight, hiding the tremor in his fingers badly. He had given the room his heat and treated it like a maintenance note. Aloan looked at the dim amber light on his suit, at the children settling around the vent in their own cautious distances, and understood that trust here did not arrive as devotion. It arrived as a child sitting 3 feet closer than yesterday. Morning came without warmth in the places the south vent could not reach. The children nearest the airflow woke slowly, faces soft for a few seconds before memory returned. The ones near the supply wall sat with their wraps pulled to their chins, backs too straight for bodies that had slept on metal. Tavin sat cross-legged beside the vent, screw tin in his lap, counting and recounting the same pieces under his breath. Lena kept the wooden doll beside Matt's boot, close enough to watch him, not close enough to be taken away. Matt had not really slept. He sat against the wall with one knee raised, the amber indicator on his suit layer blinking weakly near his collar. Every few minutes, his fingers trembled from cold. Every time they did, he picked up one of Tavin's screws and rolled it across his knuckles as if the shaking had been part of the repair plan all along. Queen Aloan noticed. So did Lena. Neither of them said it. Varesh entered before the morning meal packs were opened, followed by 2 caretakers and a junior clerk carrying a sealed slate. His black coat looked untouched by shelter air. No dust, no runoff, no evidence that he had spent the night where children had. "Your Majesty," he said, "the night observations confirm escalation. Cross-registry clustering. Unsanctioned proximity to foreign military personnel. Reduced response to caretaker redirection. Emotional displacement from lawful guardians." Matt set the screw down slowly. "That's a lot of words before breakfast." Varesh did not look at him. "I recommend immediate transfer to Correction Shelter 3. The word correction struck the room in separate places. Tavin's tin rattled once, then went silent under both hands. A noble girl lowered her water cup without drinking. One lower district boy slipped behind his sister's blanket and left only his eyes showing. Lena's fingers closed around the doll's cloth wrap until the cleaned fabric wrinkled. Aloan watched the children before she watched Varesh. Define correction. Varesh adjusted the slate. Re-establishing developmental order after acute stress. Separation by registry. Sensory reduction. Posture recovery. Reinforcement of guardian hierarchy. Captain Soren stood near the console, still as armor on a wall. Her gaze moved from the children to the queen. Aloan turned to the caretakers. "When a child cries there, what happens?" The younger caretaker swallowed. The older one answered because silence had become dangerous. "They are given quiet space until composure returns, Your Majesty." "Alone." "Monitored," Varesh said. "Safely monitored." Matt pushed himself upright too fast. His hand caught the vent housing before his knee could betray him. 3 children reached toward him and stopped at once, hands suspended in warm air like they had been caught stealing. He saw it. His face changed almost not at all, which made the hurt clearer. He lowered himself back down. "They don't need correction," he said. Varesh's mouth tightened. "You are not qualified to diagnose Valoran minors." "No," Matt picked up Tavin's tin and set it firmly back into the boy's lap. "I'm qualified to know when kids flinch before anybody touches them." He tapped the rim once. "Count them again, buddy. Slow this time." Tavin stared at the tin. "Why?" "Because 14 little pieces are easier than one big room." Tavin breathed in, shaky and thin. "1," he whispered. Then, after a pause, 2. Lena's shoulders lowered half an inch. The noble girl kept holding her cup, but her grip loosened. Varesh pointed with the slate. "There. Redirection. Attachment reinforcement. You are watching the mechanism in real time." Matt nodded, tired enough not to dress the truth up. "Yep. Keeps him breathing while adults talk too loud." The shelter held still around that. Aloan looked across the children, and their fear had stopped being a single category. It had shapes now. A tin gripped too hard. A cup untouched. A blanket raised like a wall. A doll held like proof someone had existed. This was not disorder spreading from a human. It was a map of what order had already done. Matt shifted away from the vent, palms open, creating a clear path between the children and their queen. They can go to you, he said. I'm not in the way. No child moved. Not because they chose him over her. Because choice itself had been made unsafe. Lena looked at Aloan, eyes too tired for ceremony. If I shake, she asked, do I have to leave? Varesh inhaled to answer. Aloan lifted one hand, and for once, the shelter obeyed the silence before it obeyed him. Morning came without warmth in the places the south vent could not reach. The children nearest the airflow woke slowly, faces soft for a few seconds before memory returned. The ones near the supply wall sat with their wraps pulled to their chins, backs too straight for bodies that had slept on metal. Tavin sat cross-legged beside the vent, screw tin in his lap, counting and recounting the same pieces under his breath. Lena kept the wooden doll beside Matt's boot, close enough to watch him, not close enough to be taken away. Matt had not really slept. He sat against the wall with one knee raised, the amber indicator on his suit layer blinking weakly near his collar. Every few minutes, his fingers trembled from cold. Every time they did, he picked up one of Tavin's screws and rolled it across his knuckles, as if the shaking had been part of the repair plan all along. Queen Aloan noticed. So did Lena. Neither of them said it. Varesh entered before the morning meal packs were opened, followed by 2 caretakers and a junior clerk carrying a sealed slate. His black coat looked untouched by shelter air. No dust, no runoff, no evidence that he had spent the night where children had. Your Majesty, he said, the night observations confirm escalation. Cross-registry clustering. Unsanctioned proximity to foreign military personnel. Reduced response to caretaker redirection. Emotional displacement from lawful guardians. Matt set the screw down slowly. That's a lot of words before breakfast. Varesh did not look at him. I recommend immediate transfer to Correction Shelter 3. The word correction struck the room in separate places. Tavin's tin rattled once, then went silent under both hands. A noble girl lowered her water cup without drinking. One lower district boy slipped behind his sister's blanket and left only his eyes showing. Lena's fingers closed around the doll's cloth wrap until the cleaned fabric wrinkled. Aloan watched the children before she watched Varesh. Define correction. Varesh adjusted the slate. Re-establishing developmental order after acute stress. Separation by registry. Sensory reduction. Posture recovery. Reinforcement of guardian hierarchy. Captain Soren stood near the console, still as armor on a wall. Her gaze moved from the children to the queen. Aloan turned to the caretakers. When a child cries there, what happens? The younger caretaker swallowed. The older one answered because silence had become dangerous. They are given quiet space until composure returns, Your Majesty. Alone. Monitored, Varesh said. Safely monitored. Matt pushed himself upright too fast. His hand caught the vent housing before his knee could betray him. 3 children reached toward him and stopped at once, hands suspended in warm air like they had been caught stealing. He saw it. His face changed almost not at all, which made the hurt clearer. He lowered himself back down. They don't need correction, he said. Varesh's mouth tightened. You are not qualified to diagnose Valoran minors. No, Matt picked up Tavin's tin and set it firmly back into the boy's lap. I'm qualified to know when kids flinch before anybody touches them. He tapped the rim once. Count them again, buddy. Slow this time. Tavin stared at the tin. Why? Because 14 little pieces are easier than one big room. Tavin breathed in, shaky and thin. 1, he whispered. Then, after a pause, 2. Lena's shoulders lowered half an inch. The noble girl kept holding her cup, but her grip loosened. Varesh pointed with the slate. There. Redirection. Attachment reinforcement. You are watching the mechanism in real time. Matt nodded, tired enough not to dress the truth up. Yep. Keeps him breathing while adults talk too loud. The shelter held still around that. Aloan looked across the children, and their fear had stopped being a single category. It had shapes now. A tin gripped too hard. A cup untouched. A blanket raised like a wall. A doll held like proof someone had existed. This was not disorder spreading from a human. It was a map of what order had already done. Matt shifted away from the vent, palms open, creating a clear path between the children and their queen. "They can go to you," he said. "I'm not in the way." No child moved. Not because they chose him over her. Because choice itself had been made unsafe. Lena looked at Aloan, eyes too tired for ceremony. "If I shake," she asked, "do I have to leave?" Varesh inhaled to answer. Aloan lifted one hand, and for once, the shelter obeyed the silence before it obeyed him. Varesh looked at the sealed log as if the green word on the wall had insulted the crown in public. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. When men like him felt a room turning, they reached for longer words and called them law. "Your Majesty," he said, "a visual record of improvised comfort does not resolve developmental contamination. The issue is not whether the human avoided obvious coercion. The issue is whether unsanctioned proximity displaced proper guardian hierarchy during a crisis." Matt sat near the south vent with his shoulder against the wall, one hand wrapped around a loose screw because it gave the cold somewhere small to go. He did not answer. Children listened harder when adults used words they had learned to fear. Varesh stepped into that listening. If this shelter becomes the model, every evacuation center will see registry boundaries collapse. Noble miners will attach to lower district groups. Lower district miners will bypass assigned caretakers. Royal children will seek comfort from foreign personnel before Valoran authority. That is not healing. That is disorder with a warm blanket. Captain Soren's hand hovered near the console, ready to mark the next order. Aloan did not give one. She looked at the children instead. Some had drifted closer to the vent during the logs. Some had not. A noble girl still held her water cup without drinking. The lower district siblings sat shoulder to shoulder but kept their knees angled apart, as if a line drawn by rank still ran between them on the floor. Lena stood near the queen, not touching her hand, doll tucked beneath her chin. Trust had not flooded the room. It had only found cracks. Varesh pointed toward the far corridor. Correction Shelter 3 exists for this precise reason. Separation groups by registry. Sensory reset. Posture recovery. Continuity standard restored before the next relief shift records further deviation. The phrase correction shelter hit the children in pieces. Tavin started counting the screws again without being asked, too fast this time. A toddler pulled her blanket over one ear. The noble girl set her cup down untouched. Lena's eyes dropped to the wet floor. Matt pushed himself upright slowly enough that the guards did not tense. His face had gone pale under the weathered red of his cheeks. He took one step back from the children, then another, until his shoulders touched the supply rack on the opposite wall. He raised both hands, palms out. "No proximity," he said. His voice came rough, but level. "If they want you, they've got a clear path." Varesh turned slightly, almost smiling. "You think theater helps your case?" "Not my case." Matt nodded toward the open space between the children and their queen. "Their choice." The word choice landed badly in a room trained to prefer instruction. No child ran to Aloan. No child ran to Matt either. One boy looked at a caretaker, then at the queen, then back at his own hands. A little girl scooted 3 inches closer to her brother and stopped like 3 inches might be punishable. Lena's bare toes curled against the deck, but she did not move. Varesh let the stillness ripen. "You see? They require direction." Matt's jaw tightened. He lowered his hands, but stayed against the wall. For once, he gave them no joke, no task, no screw tin, no cup, no ordinary sentence to hide inside. His silence opened the room wider than his words had. Without him filling the air with small practical things, Varesh's language stood naked among the blankets. Separation. Reset. Recovery. Registry. Lena's mouth trembled around a breath she refused to lose. Aloan watched the child fight herself for the convenience of adults and felt the last clean piece of the report break apart. She knelt, not with command, but with space. "Lena." The girl did not look up. "I'm not ordering you." That reached her. Barely. Lena's fingers tightened around the doll. "I don't know what to do." Varesh stepped forward. "That confusion is why protocol exists." Aloan turned her head, and the shelter cooled around her gaze. "No. That confusion is what your protocol made." Varesh opened his mouth, but Lena spoke first, small and cracked, still looking at the floor. "He didn't tell us to stop shaking." Matt closed his eyes for half a second. Soren's recording lens hummed softly. Aloan looked across the shelter at the human soldier standing alone beside the supply rack. making himself smaller so children could choose someone else, and understood with a force that felt almost physical. He had not stolen loyalty from the crown. He had returned to the room what the crown had taken for discipline, the right to be afraid and still be held. Aloan let Lena's words remain in the air long enough for every adult to hear what they had cost. He didn't tell us to stop shaking. The shelter did not become gentle because of them. Children still shivered. The dome still leaked gray rain. The south vent still breathed on borrowed power that would fail by noon. But something had shifted beneath the wet floor, deeper than policy and older than crowns. Aloan lowered herself fully to the deck, both knees touching metal, silver armor creaking in protest. She opened her hands and placed them palm up on her thighs. No command, no beckoning, no royal posture dressed as mercy. "I am here," she said. "That is all." Lena stared at her. The wooden doll pressed a small dent into the cloth beneath her chin. She looked once toward Matt. He stood by the supply rack, pale and tired, eyes lowered to the loose screw in his hand, as if thread alignment mattered more than the fate of a kingdom. He gave her nothing to obey. That was the gift. Lena stepped forward. 1 inch. Then another. Her whole body trembled. No caretaker corrected her shoulders. No counselor named the tremor. When she reached Aloan, she leaned in stiffly, like comfort was a door she had only seen from the outside. Aloan wrapped one arm around her a heartbeat too late, awkward and careful. Lena did not pull away. Tavin came next, but only halfway. He sat on the floor within reach of the queen's boot and kept counting screws under his breath. The noble girl did not come at all. She picked up her water cup and finally drank. The lower district siblings moved close enough for their blankets to touch. A toddler crawled out from under her wrap, saw no one punish Lena, and rested her cheek on another child's knee. Trust did not arrive as a parade. It arrived in inches, sips, loosened fingers. Varesh watched the lines he had drawn blur, without anyone stepping on them dramatically enough to punish. "Your Majesty," he said, voice tight now. "I must formally object before this breach becomes precedent." Aloan looked up with Lena against her side. "It will become precedent." Captain Soren straightened by the console. Varesh's slate clicked under his thumb. "You cannot suspend a continuity protocol during an active evacuation based on emotional display." No, Aloan's voice stayed calm. "I am suspending it based on sealed shelter logs, contradictory caretaker records, physical evidence of suppressed need, and failure of stated purpose." Soren's recording lens caught every word. "Orders. Correction Shelter 3 is closed pending direct royal audit. All registry separation orders and minor shelters are paused unless medically required. Counselor Varesh is relieved of field authority and placed under administrative review." The guards moved without touching him, creating a corridor toward the exit. No humiliation, no spectacle, just authority returning to its actual duty. Varesh looked past the queen to Matt, searching for the enemy. Matt was crouched by the south vent again, tightening the grill with fingers that shook too badly to hide. He had missed most of his own vindication, or chosen to. Aloan saw the amber-dark suit indicator near his collar, the dead environmental layer, the dried runoff on his boots. "Sergeant Carter." Matt glanced up. "Ma'am, how long will the vent hold?" "Until noon if the grid doesn't hiccup. Less if somebody keeps kicking the conduit." Tavin immediately pulled his feet back. Matt pointed the screwdriver at him. "Not an accusation, buddy. Just physics." A tiny laugh escaped one child near the blankets, then vanished into both hands. Aloan unclasped the outer thermal mantle from her shoulders. The royal fabric fell silver and heavy in the dim light. She did not drape it over Matt. She laid it on the supply rack beside him, within reach, the way he had placed cups on the floor and the doll 3 feet from Lena. "Take what you need," she said. Matt looked at the mantle, then at the children watching to see whether adults could receive care without turning it into law. His jaw worked once. No speeches. Aloan settled back onto the floor, awkwardly, because queens were not trained for circles of exhausted children. No speeches. He took the mantle, not proudly, not reluctantly, just because he was cold. Outside, rain softened against the broken dome. Inside, children sat where warmth reached them, some beside the queen, some near their siblings, some still apart, but no longer arranged by fear. Matt tightened the last screw and leaned back against the wall, wrapped in silver that was not a reward, only shelter. He had not taught them to obey. He had taught the room how to be safe enough for children to breathe. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope this story stayed with you in some quiet way. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which moment touched you most. Don't forget to subscribe to Gravity and Stardust for more emotional sci-fi stories. See you in the next journey.